Hello, my name is Dr. Spencer Brand, and I'm so thankful, first of all, for you all spending your afternoon here with us in the research room, but then also to the research room committee and to Dr. Fred Sienkiewicz for the invitation to share my research with you this afternoon. My research for my doctoral project focused on Czech trumpet music and Czech trumpet style. And specifically, this presentation is going to focus on music from communist Czechoslovakia and an investigation of essential Czech musical elements. So my interest in this topic was sparked when I was a member of the Prague Summer Nights Festival Orchestra in 2018, in which I had the opportunity to study with two amazing Czech trumpet players, Miroslav Kimar and Ladislav Kozyrka, who Kimar is pictured here on your right. And in my lessons with them, I was amazed by their sound concept and their style of playing, but then I was also incredibly astounded by the repertoire that they're playing by a lot of these Czech composers that I'd never heard of in my entire life. And so for my doctoral project, I really wanted to focus on these pieces that are generally unknown and generally not played, especially in the United States. And so this project first seeks to broaden the awareness of this body of literature, which encompasses nearly 200 pieces for solo trumpet from the period of 1948 until today. And then second, to interview and write about significant Czech trumpet players, and then finally typify a Czech style of trumpet playing. Now, especially when we're discussing nationalistic playing styles, it's often very difficult because we default to these metaphysical traits in music and in playing. And so in my interview with Miroslav Kimar about this, he pointed to Rudolf Lisi, who is pictured here on your right. He was the principal trumpet of the Czech Philharmonic starting in the 1940s. And he is a harbinger of really the modern Czech trumpet playing style, along with his fellow section mates from this period, including Jaroslav Kolaj, Jiří Horák, and Václav Plačík. And specifically, Mr. Kimar had this to say, that the old trumpeters played with a beautiful style, very lyrically and melodically. Even in the greatest fortissimos, they did not play very hard or aggressively. They played lyrically and beautifully. I'm talking about the trumpeters from the Czech Philharmonic. In this genre, there's an inherent special Czech melodiousness, which has been abandoned in recent years. And now, for the sake of this presentation, I can't tell you all of these factors, but this is, I feel like, one of the most crucial parts, especially in understanding their solo repertoire. Now, I would be remiss without at least acknowledging the fact that Czechoslovakia, for half of its existence, was a communist country. And particularly that there's two main events that really shapes the art that came out of this period. Specifically the coup d'etat in 1948, which started relatively peacefully, but then in the years following it, led to thousands of people being killed that were political enemies of the regime. And then also the 1968 Prague Spring, which was the invasion of Czechoslovakia by the Warsaw Pact countries following a year of democratization of the Czechoslovak government. These two periods led to decades of normalization periods that created two different camps of artists and composers and performers. The first of which are communist artists that subscribed to the ideas of socialist realism, which is something that, a term that was typified after this period. And then the second camp of composers and artists represent those that were prohibited at some point during this time. Czechoslovakia's first contemporary trumpet concerto, contemporary meaning of this day, comes from the composer Slava Orlova. Although she's a relatively unknown composer today, at the time she was an incredibly decorated communist artist. She received the Soviet decoration for outstanding work, and Gardovsky in her book describes her as having a broad creative fantasy, fortified by a profound understanding of joy and pain, which found its expression in her creative work. And this concerto is very special because it actually comes at a period of time in which he composed 6 major instrumental concertos, this being the first of those during the 10-year period where she was moving away from doctrinal mass songs. And she really wanted to move more back towards art music. But she, in still order to fit into this box of socialist realism, she had to still use historical themes and Czech folk songs. This trumpet concerto was written in 1953, and then it was premiered a year later by Ivo Priess. And there are several other composers that really fit this description of socialist realism, that being the overall generalization. But one of the other important concertos that followed this was Zdeněk Křížek's trumpet concerto in 1957. However, this was Křížek's first major work, and when he was still just in his 20s. But most importantly, it helped launch the career of Václav Junek, his solo career, who was later the professor of trumpet at the Academy of Arts in Prague from 1969 until 2007. But it also established the trumpet in Czechoslovakia as a solo instrument. And so, to get a taste of this style of music, I wanted to share with you a recording of one of our most popular trumpet players, Timothy Dockschitzer, playing Trompetina for trumpet and piano by Jiří Power. You will notice that Dockschitzer does take some liberties with the music, as you can tell a little bit, but I think that it really gives you a clear picture of especially this style of music and the type of repertoire that they were writing. Now, this brings us to the second camp of composers, those that were prohibited at some point during the communist period of Czechoslovakia. And I've selected these 3 artists because they're representative of really 3 different effects that the communist government had on artists. The first one, who is pictured here on your right, is Miloslav Kabelaj, and he was the most significant symphonist after Dvorak in Czechoslovakia. And because of his prominence, after 1948, he was barred from leaving the country because they didn't want him to go to another country and work. They wanted him to work in Czechoslovakia. But because he was very interested and invested in composing experimental and electronic music, he was ultimately forced to work in small towns because that was the only place where he could have his music performed. In the case of Jan Kopper, he's actually credited as being one of the most significant composers from this period. But yet he was prohibited despite winning the Stalin Prize for composition in 1953. And it was actually winning that prize and experiencing the Stalinistic scares in Moscow that caused him to become disillusioned with communism. And so in 1968, during the occupation of Czechoslovakia, he was caught openly protesting and henceforth was completely prohibited from any of his music being performed. And then finally, Mark Copulent who tragically just passed away this year. He is a composer where the government totally recognized the inexplicable talent that he had. And so there are very many pieces of his that were performed during this period, but some of them that were prohibited mainly because they had religious purposes. And that was something that was totally outlawed in communist Czechoslovakia. And so to give you an idea of this type of music, I wanted to share with you a recording of Miroslav Kimar performing Miloslav Kabelac's Stabat Mater movement from Faded Dramas of Man. And this is a piece for narrator, trumpet, piano, and percussion, and this is actually the only movement that's not in Czech. This is in Latin. Both of the pieces that we just listened to have these very dark undertones. However, it would be a huge generalization to say that all of these pieces were like this. The last piece that I wanted to share with you specifically represents a piece that has a tremendous amount of joy in it, and that's Václav Trojan's Concertino. Now, Trojan's character naturally has this very Mozartian sunshine, and that really shines through in his music. And he's described as having a lively bohemian character. And in the Concertino, we really get a sense of that character. And it comes at his mature period of composition in which he was using his favorite motifs. And this piece was premiered by Vladimir Rezlik, who is the current professor of trumpet at the Academy of Arts in Prague. And the recording I'm sharing with you today is of the third movement of this concerto. And this is a performance of the third movement by Stefan Leitner. So even just from that little snippet, you really get a sense of, even in the 1970s, that there's this really big difference in all of the pieces that you have. And this is a part of the catalog that I created for my doctoral project, in which I list almost every single piece that I could find by a Czech composer from 1945 until today. And as you can tell, this is representative of a wide variety of different types of music, from different combinations of unaccompanied to concerto works, and then even chamber works that I didn't include in this list. And then even a wide range of abilities, from beginner to virtuosic type pieces. And then finally, a huge range of styles, ranging from experimental to the neo-romantic that we started with, in even popular and third stream genres like the Vashkaj Jazz Concerto for trumpet, piano, and drums, which is an incredibly interesting piece. And the future of my research is going to focus almost entirely on typesetting and recording the unpublished pieces, because a huge number of these are currently they only exist as manuscripts, or there's no recordings of them. So the three that I shared with you are only just a few of the recordings that actually exist. And then secondly, compose more extensive biographies of the trumpet players from this period so that we really have a clear picture of the pressures that they were under, but then also, even more so, seek to more define the style of what makes their music Czech. Thank you all so much for attending this session this afternoon. I hope that I get a chance to talk to you. If you'd like to learn more, I have my poster back there. You can scan this QR code here to find my research. But I hope to talk to you more afterwards. Thank you all so much.
Any questions from the floor? Were there particular pieces that stand out as have continued to be performed nowadays, like standard repertoire in Czech or elsewhere?
Yes, so Trumpetina is actually one of them that's really common. And then the usually Dvořák Sonata is one that's really common. It was written in the 1980s, and it's still used as a competition piece in the Czech Republic. With the last piece, the Trojan Concertino, it was one that sort of existed in part because it was passed down. So like Professor Unick passed it on to like my teacher, Ladislav Kozderka, who then passed it on to me. And it didn't exist in a published version for trumpet and piano until 2015, in preparation for the Prague Spring music competition in 2016. So like some of these pieces, it's gone up and down in their popularity. And for Jiří Power, after the Velvet Revolution, he's actually a composer because he was communist, he has sort of drifted into not knowing what happened to him afterwards, in part because he was a communist. Does that help answer your question?
Anyone else?
Yes.
This, I guess, goes with that one in the sense of, do you think that, because I feel like we don't get a whole lot of knowledge about Czech composers, especially from this time, unless they move to Austria or Germany and then we find out about them. Do you think it has to do with the communist regime and how Western world often sees that as such a negative time?
Yes. That's a great question, and that is definitely true. On my website, there's a link to an article by Miloslav Juzel, and he describes a little bit more in detail the actual conditions that were placed on Czech artists. And in general, especially with these normalization, what they called conferences, it was generally worse conditions than in most of the other Soviet bloc countries. Any other questions? That was such a wonderful one.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all so much.